To bind off in the middle of a project, meaning we're not going to bind off an entire row of stitches, we're going to bind off some stitches and then keep working, is handled a little bit differently than just binding off at the end of the work. So I'm going to show how to bind off stitches at the edges of your pieces and then also in the middle as you would for, say, a neckline. So to bind off at the beginning of a row, and you would do this possibly for armholes, or if you're doing lace work, sometimes you need to bind off stitches to make points. You are going to want to bind off and mark, possibly if you need to, the stitches that you're going to bind off, and I'll show you why. So let's say my pattern asks me to bind off 5 stitches, so I'll count my 5 bind off stitches, and then I'm going to just place a marker in there. Sorry about my hand in the way there. So now I'm going to bind off these 5 stitches. Well, to bind off my first stitch, to use the standard bind off, we knit 1, and then I still need to knit the second stitch in order to have 2 stitches on my right hand needle to bind off. So when I pass that over and off, that is bind off 1. So I'll knit another one, and now I have bound off 2, knit again, and now I bound off 3, knit again, and now I've bound off 4. But the reason I put my marker in, as you can see, I still have 1 stitch left before the marker. Because if you follow down these columns of stitches, you can see here was 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's that 5th stitch that I was asked to bind off, but it's still over here on the right hand needle. So I'm going to have to knit 1 stitch that's actually past the 5 bind off stitches. So when I go ahead and knit that stitch, find my working yarn here, and when I pass that over and off, I have bound off 5 stitches. Now let's talk about binding off in the middle of a project. So let's just say that these 5 stitches here, right here, are the center of your piece, and your pattern says bind off center 5 stitches. So you would locate the center 5 stitches and then put a marker on either side of those 5 stitches. And these are the center ones for your neckline that need to go away to begin your neck opening. So we would go ahead and possibly knit, work in pattern till you get to the center 5 stitches. Now many times knitters make the mistake of thinking that to bind off this first stitch, they're just going to go ahead, knit this one and pass it over. But no, that would be binding off this stitch. You need to work until you get to that marker. Take that marker off, and we're then inside the marker. You will knit 1, knit the second one, and pass that stitch over and off. So there's my first bind off. Knit, pass that over, that's 2, pass that over, 3, knit, pass that one over, that's 4. Now you can see I've only bound off, if you counted with me, I've only bound off 4 stitches. I still have 1 stitch left that would be in between that marker or before this marker we place. So I'm going to take that off, and I've got to knit 1 stitch past the marker, and when I pass that over, I have bound off the 5 stitches for the center neckline. Now if my pattern directed me to bind off 5 stitches like I did at the beginning of the row, it says bind off 5 stitches at each edge for armhole. Well, you cannot bind off at the end of the row, because when you bind off at the end of the row, you would have 1 stitch hanging here and then the big hole. So if a pattern says to bind off at each armhole edge, you have to then turn to the wrong side of the work, and you're going to be binding off, because you can only bind off at the beginning. You can't bind off at the end. You can bind off the beginning, the middle, but not the end. So here I would bind off to match the other side. And I'll just do a few so you can see. Here's binding off on both sides and then binding off in the middle. Happy knitting!